After years of living in cramped quarters and sharing space with unfamiliar roommates, Emma Carter finally had what she'd always dreamed of: a place of her own. It was a late autumn afternoon, the sky covered in pale gray, the air carrying a light chill and the distinct scent of damp wood typical of the old neighborhood. As she slid the key into the lock and pushed open the white-painted wooden door, Emma paused for a moment as if trying to etch this feeling into her memory. This was her home. No more voices echoing through the walls. No more waiting for her turn in the bathroom or enduring the smell of someone else's dinner in the shared kitchen. Everything here belonged to her and only her. The apartment wasn't large, but it was modern and well-equipped. Polished oak floors gleamed underfoot, and large windows bathed the living room in soft afternoon light, creating a warm, gentle glow. Emma stepped inside her shoes, tapping softly on the empty floor. In her current hands was the final moving box, light in weight, but heavy with memories of a former life. She placed it in the corner of the room and turned in a slow circle, letting her eyes wander over the space. The compact kitchen sat to the left with granite countertops and light wood cabinetry. The living area and bedroom were separated by a partial wall, enough to feel open, yet still offer privacy. It was exactly as she had imagined. But as the door closed behind her, a strange feeling swept over her silence. Not the peaceful kind one longs for after a tiring day, but a heavy, lingering silence that seemed to swallow the room whole. In the years she had shared homes with others, no matter how inconvenient, there was always the sound of life, laughter, footsteps, even the occasional argument. But now there was nothing. Only the distant hum of traffic from below and the steady beat of her own heart. Emma pulled back the curtains, letting in more light. She sat down on the couch, feeling the soft give of the cushions beneath her. Part of her felt relieved that everything was finally done, the move, the cleaning, the paperwork. But another part of her felt empty. The freedom she had long dreamed of seemed to come with a cost. She hadn't accounted for loneliness. That first night in the new apartment, Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Everything in the room was new, from the pristine white sheets to the bedside lamp casting a soft golden glow. But despite the perfection, sleep wouldn't come. The ticking clock, the wind whistling through the old window frames, every sound seemed amplified in the utter stillness. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, curling into herself against a chill that came not from the weather, but from within. In the past, Emma had fantasized about this moment. Back in the cluttered room with two loud and messy roommates, she had pictured having her own space, being able to hang art wherever she wanted, to play music without headphones, to live by her own rhythm. But now, actually being alone, she realized her dream had lacked one essential detail: the presence of another. She thought back to those evenings when she'd come home and someone would ask, "How was your day?" Even if it was just out of politeness. She missed the laughter in the kitchen, the sound of a blow dryer humming from the next room, the clatter of dishes as they cooked together. Those small, annoying things had become precious in their absence. Emma sighed, burying her face into the pillow. She didn't regret choosing independence, but it was clear she hadn't prepared herself emotionally for this solitude. For a fleeting moment, she felt lost in the very place she now called home. Her eyes drifted to the window where the streetlights began to glow, and people hurried home to family, lovers, or even just someone waiting inside. She, on the other hand, had no one. And that night, amid the silence and emptiness, Emma made a decision. She needed something, someone alive, a companion to fill the growing void inside her heart. And just a few days later, that decision would lead her to Sunridge Animal Shelter, where she would meet Max. A few days after that first lonely night, Emma didn't hesitate any longer. She pulled a note from the fridge, scribbled the words, "Need a friend," and drew a small smiley face underneath. Then she grabbed her purse, locked the door, and stepped outside. No more overthinking. She knew exactly what she needed. The city that day was gray and cold, the sky blanketed with thick clouds mirroring her own mood. The Sunridge Animal Shelter was located on the southern outskirts, far from the noisy city center. When she stepped inside, the sound of barking echoed through the hallways. Every kennel had a pair of eager eyes looking out tails, wagging bodies, jumping with excitement. Emma walked slowly past each cage, her eyes scanning, her heart racing. She had loved dogs since she was a child, but all those years of renting cramped apartments had made pet ownership impossible. Now she had space time, and more importantly, a hollow part of her heart begging to be filled. Strangely, amidst the dozens of noisy, excited dogs, Emma's attention was drawn to one sitting quietly at the far end. It was a German shepherd with thick black and brown fur and tall, alert ears, regal yet reserved. He didn't bark, didn't jump, just stared at her with deep, dark brown eyes, calm and unreadable. The way he sat still made Emma stop in her track. It was as if an invisible thread had silently tightened between two strangers. Emma knelt in front of the cage. She extended her hand, fingers gently outstretched. The dog hesitated, tilting his head slightly to one side. Then, after a pause that felt longer than it really was, he slowly approached, sniffed her fingers, and pressed his head gently into her palm. The gesture made Emma's heart clench. "What's your name?" she whispered, even though she knew no one would answer. "Max," came a voice from behind. One of the shelter workers had walked up. "He's about 3 years old, rescued from an abandoned home. He's very sweet, just a little quiet, probably needs time to trust someone again." Emma didn't hesitate. She turned around and said softly but firmly, "I'll take Max." Max went home with her that afternoon. In the car, he sat quietly in the back seat, no fuss, no excitement. Emma glanced in the rearview mirror from time to time, catching that same calm gaze and wondering, did he know his life had just changed forever? When they arrived, Max entered the apartment like a polite guest. He didn't dart around sniffing every corner like most dogs. Instead, he walked calmly through the living room, inspected a few corners, then sat beside the sofa as if he'd lived there all along. Emma had prepared a small bed for him near the bedroom door, a warm blanket and a small pillow. Not much, but enough to feel like he belonged. She hadn't expected Max to adjust so quickly. From day one, he chose his favorite spot, a corner of the sofa near the window where the afternoon sun spilled in. He didn't bark, didn't chew anything, didn't make a mess. He just silently observed her as she cooked, worked, or lost herself in thought. Like a quiet shadow, always present, always watching. The emptiness in her heart started to fade. Now there was someone walking beside her in the long hallway. There was the soft tapping of nails on the floor whenever she stepped out of the kitchen. And most of all, there were warm eyes watching over her when night fell. On the first night, Emma told Max to sleep on his own little bed by the door. She knelt down, stroked his head, and whispered, "Good night, sweetheart." Max nestled into the blanket, let out a small sigh, and closed his eyes. Emma climbed into bed, pulled the blanket over herself, and smiled at the strange but comforting sense of safety settling in her chest. But on the third night, something unexpected happened. Half asleep, she felt a warm presence along her legs. She stirred slightly and realized Max was lying at her feet, still and quiet, clearly not in his own bed. "Max," she murmured drowsily. The dog lifted his head, meeting her eyes, those same calm, thoughtful eyes, almost as if trying to say something. Then he quietly jumped down and returned to his bed. Emma smiled and pulled the blanket up again, drifting back to sleep, but that wasn't the end. On the fifth night, Max returned to her bed, this time, waiting until she was completely asleep. Emma discovered him there the next morning, his body curled up beside hers. She sighed, looking at the dog sprawled across nearly half the mattress. "Seriously, Max," she muttered, but her heart softened. She thought about making him return to his own bed, thought about reestablishing boundaries. But then she looked at him, sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady, his warmth pressed against her, and she couldn't do it. Maybe that presence was exactly what she needed, more than anything else. And from that night on, Max slept in the bed with Emma. The apartment no longer felt silent. His steady breaths became part of her dreams, turning the once still room into a place filled not just with quiet, but with life. From that night on, Max's presence on the bed was no longer an exception. It became an unspoken routine. Emma no longer felt surprised when she woke up to find the large dog curled at her feet, his breathing steady and warm, like a living hot water bottle. Though there were moments she frowned when the blanket ended up entirely on one side, or when she found herself squeezed to the very edge of the mattress. In the end, she always let it be. "All right, but don't hog the whole bed, okay?" she whispered one night as Max laid his head on her pillow like he was a person too. Max simply sighed, closed his eyes, and Emma didn't have the heart to push him away. She began to notice how Max's presence made the once quiet and cold apartment feel alive and less frightening. When night fell, the darkness no longer swallowed everything whole because beside her was Max, silent, loyal, and warm. On some nights when she woke up drenched in cold sweat from a bad dream, Max would already be staring at her as if he sensed the unrest in her mind. No barking, no sudden movements, just that look, and it was enough to make her feel like she wasn't alone. But then the changes started. At first, it was just a few vague signs she didn't pay much attention to. Mama would wake up with a dull headache as if she hadn't slept well. She blamed it on staying up late, watching Netflix, or eating dinner too late. She even blamed her new pillow, even though it was so soft that every guest she'd had raved about it. "I probably just need to sleep earlier," she told herself, but things kept getting worse. Every morning she woke feeling like her energy had been drained. Her legs felt heavy when she got out of bed. Her eyes stung. Her eyelids drooped as if they were weighed down by stones. And no matter how long she slept early or late, the exhaustion remained, even grew worse. She started nodding off during work, even in the middle of Zoom meetings where she had to grit her teeth just to stay awake. One time, her manager looked directly at the webcam and asked, "Emma, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept a minute." Emma forced a weak smile, waved it off. "I'm fine, probably just off my sleep schedule lately." But that was a lie. The truth was she had been sleeping wrapped up in her blanket with Max beside her, lulled to sleep by his steady breathing, and yet every morning she felt as though she hadn't slept at all. The feeling became deeper, stretched longer until Emma began to dread nighttime. She feared the moment the lights went out because it felt like surrendering her body to some unseen force that drained a little more life from her. Each night, Max wasn't the same either. If he had once been energetic, eager to trot around the house now, Max was sluggish and lethargic. Each morning, instead of greeting her with bright eyes and a wagging tail, he'd barely lift his head before letting it fall again. His tail, once a little fan that wagged nonstop at the sound of her voice now, gave a half-hearted twitch and then went still. There were evenings when she returned home and Max no longer came to the door to greet her. He just lay there curled in a corner, not barking, not moving, only breathing faintly. Emma worried but tried to reassure herself. He's probably just tired like I am. Maybe it's the weather or he's still adjusting. One night as Max nestled against her feet while she watched TV, she ran her hand through his thick fur and realized his body was warmer than usual. But his nose was still damp, his eyes still clear. She scratched behind his ear and whispered, "Maybe you're just a little under the weather, huh?" Then she sat in silence, ignoring the growing unease flickering inside her like a hidden flame. What finally made Emma start questioning everything was a strange dream. In her hazy sleep, she heard a soft hissing sound, like air leaking from somewhere. It wasn't loud, but just enough to wake her up in the middle of the night. She sat up, discomfort crawling over her skin. Turning to her side, she saw Max breathing heavily, eyes half shut. Another time, she awoke to the sensation of the blanket being tugged. In her groggy state, she saw Max gently gripping the edge of the blanket in his teeth, pulling it toward the door. "Max, what are you doing?" she mumbled. He only let out a quiet whimper, a sound filled with worry and pleading. His entire body was tense, his tail tucked low. In that moment, Emma knew for certain something was wrong. But when she stumbled to the bathroom and looked into the mirror, she truly gasped. Her face was gaunt, hollow like someone who had been sick for months. Her skin was pale, the bags under her eyes deep and bruised. She touched her cheek and felt how sharply her cheekbone jutted out. She hadn't been dieting, but her body looked as if it had been shrinking piece by piece. Emma staggered out of the bathroom and looked at Max, still lying motionless at the foot of the bed, his breathing shallow and uneven. Her heart clenched. If both she and Max were deteriorating, then clearly something was killing them slowly, silently. Every single day, Emma sank to the bathroom floor, her back pressed against the cold wall. Her heartbeat raced in her chest, not exactly from fear, but from something more abstract awareness. Awareness that her body was deteriorating, breaking down, and that if she kept ignoring the signs, there might be no chance left to fix it. She lowered her head, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her breath growing heavier as if each inhale had to fight through an invisible wall weighing down her lungs. Outside, Max still lay motionless at the foot of the bed, occasionally letting out a faint whimper. Looking at him, his half-closed eyes shallow breathing, Emma saw a reflection of herself. Two living beings sharing the same space, both slowly being drained of life, day by day without understanding why. The days that followed passed like a fog. Emma woke up feeling worse than ever. Her head felt like it was filled with lead, her eyelids so heavy they wouldn't lift. She staggered out of bed like a shadow, made herself a strong cup of coffee. But even the bitterness did nothing to wake her up. She tried to eat breakfast, but her mouth was dry, her throat tight. Every spoonful of porridge was a battle. Most mornings she gave up and only drank water. At the office, she would rest her head on the desk during team meetings. Once her manager had to tap her shoulder gently. "Emma, are you okay? You don't look well at all." Emma forced a weak smile and mumbled something about not sleeping well, then asked to leave early. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about lack of sleep. Something else was happening. Something was quietly draining the life out of her. Hour by hour, day by day, she began losing weight. The jeans that used to fit snugly now hung loose on her hips. Her blouses looked oversized, like she was borrowing someone else's clothes. Her skin lost its natural color, turning grayish and pale. Every time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. One Saturday afternoon, she met her longtime friend Sarah at their usual coffee shop. The moment Sarah walked in and saw her, she froze. "Emma, oh my God, what happened to you? You've lost so much weight." Emma only gave a weak smile and slumped into her seat like her entire body had surrendered. Sarah looked closely, the worry etched across her face. "Your skin's paper pale and the circles under your eyes. What have you been eating?" "It's nothing," Emma dodged. "I've just been busy. Probably just stress from work." Sarah didn't buy it. "Don't joke, Emma. You look like you've just walked out of a hospital. You need to see a doctor." Emma stared down into her latte, stirring it in silence. The truth was she had thought about it, but every time she picked up her phone to book an appointment, she backed out. She was scared not of the results, but of being told she was overreacting. That it was just fatigue and she only needed rest, but she had tried resting, and the more she rested, the worse she got. So did Max. Every morning he no longer got up to see her off. Every evening he didn't rush to greet her at the door. Some days she had to call his name 3 times before he'd slowly drag himself to her side, then collapse again. She brought him his favorite food, slow-cooked beef stew he used to love, but Max just sniffed it and turned away. A dog turning down his favorite meal that terrified her. One night, Emma was jolted awake by the sensation of someone tugging at her. She opened her eyes and saw Max gently pulling the edge of the blanket with his teeth, his entire body tense, eyes wide and full of panic. He didn't bark, didn't jump. He just pulled and whimpered softly like he was begging for help. "Max, what's wrong?" Emma murmured. But she couldn't sit up. Her body felt glued to the bed, impossibly heavy. It took all her strength just to raise one arm, her mind spinning like she was drowning underwater. Max kept pulling the blanket, letting out more small cries. Emma knew something was happening, but she couldn't call for help, couldn't move. In the darkness, she met Max's desperate eyes. She mouthed, barely whispering, "Help me, Max." And then everything went dark. The next morning when she opened her eyes, it took her a few seconds to realize she was still alive. She sat up quickly, her entire body aching. Turning to her side, she saw Max lying still, barely breathing. Emma stumbled into the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, her skin deathly pale, her hair greasy, like it hadn't been washed in a week. She looked like a walking corpse. This time she didn't hesitate. With trembling fingers, Emma grabbed her phone and typed a single message to Sarah. "Come over, please." When Sarah arrived, she didn't say a word at first, just stared at Emma, then at Max. A few moments later, she spoke in a cold but resolute tone. "You can't stay here another night." Emma shook her head weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I just need a little more rest," Sarah shouted. "No, Emma, you're dying. Don't you get it? You and Max, you're both wasting away, and no one knows why I'm not letting you die in this apartment." Emma wanted to argue, but her body had no strength left. And in that moment, as Sarah pulled her up by the arm, Emma understood. If she hesitated again, there might not be anyone left to pull her back from the darkness, swallowing both her and Max. Sarah practically dragged Emma out of the apartment with every ounce of determination a best friend could muster. She didn't need to hear any more excuses. Somehow instinct told Sarah that this place was slowly killing both Emma and Max. As the two of them stepped outside, Emma had to lean almost entirely on her friend just to stay upright. The air that day was cold but fresh. A soft morning breeze rustled the leaves above tangling Emma's hair, but she felt strangely lighter, like she had just escaped a prison she hadn't realized she was trapped in. Max followed behind slowly, every step heavy as if lifting his paws required great effort. What broke Emma's heart wasn't just that he was weak, but that he had stopped trying to hide it. In the days prior, no matter how tired he had been, Max would still lift his head, still wag his tail when she called. But now he simply walked quiet and exhausted. Just like her at the vet clinic, cold fluorescent lights spilled onto the polished white floors. Emma sat in the waiting room, clutching Max's leash tightly, as if letting go might mean losing something vital. Max lay curled at her feet, eyes barely open, ears twitching occasionally in response to distant noises. His body was noticeably thinner. His ribs jutted out through his thick fur, his belly had sunken in. Emma blamed herself for not noticing sooner. But how could she have known? How could anyone imagine that something inside her own home was so harmful? The examination room door opened and Dr. Hayes, the vet who had seen Max a few weeks ago, stepped out with a clipboard in hand. He looked at Emma, his expression serious but not harsh. "Come on in, Emma. Bring Max," she nodded, leaned down to pat Max gently on the back. "Come on, sweetheart." Max stood up, trudging into the exam room with slow, labored steps. His tail didn't wag anymore. It just dragged along the floor behind him. Dr. Hayes began the checkup. He silently pressed the stethoscope to Max's chest, checked his eyes, ears, gums, and took his temperature. Every movement was deliberate and gentle. Emma sat across from him, barely daring to breathe, her palms damp with sweat. Finally, Hayes looked up. "Max is showing signs of full-body fatigue. His respiratory function is weakening. Circulation is low. But what's strange, he doesn't show symptoms of infection or a viral illness." Emma bit her lip. "Could it be the air in the apartment? I've been feeling the same way." Hayes nodded slowly. "I think that's very likely. When both a person and their pet are experiencing unexplained symptoms, the environment is usually the cause. My suspicion is carbon monoxide poisoning. It's colorless, odorless, and if it's leaking from an old heating system, it can cause exactly the symptoms you're both showing." Emma's eyes widened. "TO gas. But I never smelled anything." "That's the most dangerous part," Hayes said gravely. "It kills without warning. Even if the levels aren't high enough to cause sudden death, long-term exposure leads to exhaustion, organ damage, neurological issues, even death if not detected in time." The moment she left the clinic, Emma called a home safety inspector. A man named Jake showed up hours later, tall, wearing safety goggles and carrying a compact gas detector. When he stepped into Emma's apartment, everything seemed just as calm as always. But within minutes, as he moved the sensor near the heating vent, the device let out a series of urgent beeps. Jake frowned, stared at the screen, then turned to Emma. "There's CO leaking. Not enough to kill you immediately, but more than enough to slowly wear you down if you're exposed long-term. Emma went numb. Suddenly everything made sense, painfully, heartbreakingly so. She remembered every morning she had woken up with splitting headaches, the times she struggled to lift her legs out of bed, and how Max had curled up by her feet, whimpering faintly like he no longer had the strength to bark. It all had a reason, and it came from the very place she thought was safest, her home. Jake immediately shut off the heating system, opened every window, and called a repair crew to come for a thorough inspection. "You can't stay here another minute," he said firmly. "Pack your essentials and find somewhere else to stay for a few days. Let this place fully ventilate." Emma nodded, still dizzy with the shock. She rushed to pack a small bag, just a few clothes, some medicine, food for Max, and his vaccination booklet. As she stepped out into the hallway with the bag slung over her shoulder, a cold breeze brushed her face, making her shiver, but also clearing her head. Fresh outdoor air. Something she had always taken for granted now felt like a life-saving gift. That night, she and Max stayed at Sarah's place. Emma lay on the couch, Max at her feet, like always. But this time, sleep came without the weight on her chest. No nightmares, no gasping for breath, no invisible grip choking her in the dark. Only peace, relief, as if for the first time in weeks, her body could truly breathe. The next morning, she woke up and saw Max. For the first time in nearly a month, he stood up on his own, stretched slightly, and walked over to lick her hand. Emma broke down in tears. No words were needed. She knew they had escaped something, not just the carbon monoxide, but a slow, silent death lurking in the one place she thought was supposed to keep her safe. Emma had never imagined the day would come when she'd be afraid to visit a doctor. But that morning, after seeing Max stand up, stretch his legs, and gently lick her hand with that familiar, loving warmth, she knew she could no longer delay what she should have done weeks ago. Sarah took her to a general clinic near the city center. Emma sat curled into the old leather chair in the waiting room, clutching her purse like she was awaiting a verdict. Sarah sat beside her, saying nothing, only occasionally glancing over and resting a hand on her shoulder. A quiet reminder, "I'm here. Don't be afraid." When her name was called, Emma stood up with legs that barely held her weight. She walked into the exam room in a daze, as if floating above the ground. The room was cold and sterile, and the faint scent of antiseptic made her stomach turn. The attending physician was a lean man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair, neatly combed, and thin glasses resting on his nose. The name tag on his chest read, Dr. Rajiv Patel. He looked at Emma with calm, professional eyes. Not cold, just steady. "Hello, Emma, I'm Dr. Patel. I've reviewed the symptoms you listed. We'll begin with a few blood tests and an oxygen saturation check." "Okay." Emma only nodded slightly. If her voice could come out at all, it would surely tremble. When the nurse came to draw her blood, Emma turned her head away. It felt like the blood flowing out of her didn't just carry toxins, but the exhaustion that had been building for more than a month. She stayed in the clinic for nearly an hour waiting for the results. The waiting made every minute feel stretched. Sarah held her hand in silence. Emma leaned her head against her friend's shoulder. Eyes half closed, but she didn't sleep. She was facing a nameless fear that her symptoms weren't caused by her surroundings, but by something far worse, something irreversible lurking inside her body. The door opened. Patel stepped in with a folder in hand, his expression unreadable. He sat down, flipped through the pages, then looked up at Emma. "The good news is your blood test doesn't show anything immediately life-threatening," he began. Emma held her breath, but, he continued, "there are a few values that concern me." "What are they?" Emma asked, barely audible. "You're showing signs of chronic oxygen deprivation. Your hemoglobin levels are lower than average, and several biochemical markers suggest mild exposure to toxic gas, specifically carbon monoxide." Emma's eyes widened. Her heart pounded in her chest. "CO gas, it's real." Dr. Patel nodded. "I can't say with 100% certainty without testing the air in your living space. But based on your symptoms and these results, it's highly likely you have been exposed to carbon monoxide over an extended period." Emma turned to Sarah, whispering in disbelief, "Just like Max." Dr. Patel tilted his head. "Max. My dog." Emma replied quickly, "He's been just as exhausted as me. At the same time, we lived together in the same apartment." Dr. Patel straightened in his chair, folding his arms. A subtle nod followed, like he had just placed the final piece of a puzzle. "You and your dog experiencing the same symptoms at the same time in the same environment. That's very telling. The issue is clearly environmental. I strongly recommend having your heating system, ventilation, and air quality inspected for toxic leaks as soon as possible." Emma nodded, this time with clarity and resolve. "I already did, and there was a leak." Dr. Patel paused for a second, then said softly, "You're very lucky, Emma. Most people don't find out until it's too late." After leaving the clinic, Emma stood outside under the hospital's awning, taking a deep breath. The winter air hit her lungs, making her shiver. But it brought a rare sensation, something that felt like life. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the emotional release of the truth. Harsh, yes, but also freeing. At last, she knew what was happening, and at last she could do something about it. Sarah came up beside her and said gently, "I know a gas technician who inspects home systems. If you need, I'll call him." Emma looked at her with gratitude. "I already did. His name is Jake. Thanks to him, I found out about the carbon monoxide." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Jake Morgan." "Yeah, he came really fast. And honestly, it was because of Max that I decided to get it checked. If he hadn't pulled the blanket, hadn't tried to drag me out of bed that night, I might not be standing here." The sentence trailed off, but Sarah understood Emma didn't need to finish it. On the ride home, Emma still felt physically weak, but her mind had never been clearer. All the doubts, the confusion, the gnawing anxiety, finally they had an answer. And most importantly, she had crossed the line between surviving and not. That night, she wrapped her arms tightly around Max. For the first time, she truly felt the warmth, not just from his body, but from the spirit of a creature who had protected her in his own silent way. No words, no explanations, just pure, unwavering loyalty. Emma returned to her apartment the next morning after making sure Max was resting safely at Sarah's place. As she stepped into the building lobby, the place she had once proudly called home now felt foreign, like a silent trap that had lured her in, lulled her into sleep with deadly stillness, and slowly drained her life away without a sound. Everything inside the apartment was just as she had left it. Her favorite reading lamp, the couch by the window, the bed she had shared with Max each night, but now everything seemed tainted. Haunted by a quiet betrayal, the air itself. Jake Morgan arrived in less than an hour after Emma called. Still the same man, tall, sturdy, in a dark protective jacket, carrying a case of air detection equipment. He nodded at Emma without any unnecessary small talk. "Let's start with the kitchen," Jake said. His voice was low and decisive. Emma followed closely behind him like a shadow. As Jake waved the detector across the gas pipes in the kitchen, the signal light on the device blinked steadily. No alert sounds. Everything seemed safe. "No leaks from the kitchen," Jake muttered quietly. He moved through other areas near the water heater, around the electrical outlets behind the washing machine. The detector remained silent. Emma began to feel uneasy. If not from here, then she trailed off. Jake raised a hand, signaling her to be quiet. "There's one more place we need to check." He headed toward the bedroom, the place where Emma had spent so many foggy, dreamless nights, where Max had collapsed from exhaustion. Jake walked over to the floor vent, the central heating system that connected to every apartment in the building. He placed the sensor directly against the metal grill and held it there. 1 second. 2. Beep! A sharp, piercing beep rang out. The signal light turned red. Jake frowned and quickly adjusted the detection settings. The beeping continued, this time faster, more urgent. The numbers on the display began jumping wildly. "This is it," he said, his voice suddenly more serious. "Carbon monoxide." Emma froze. "The CO levels here exceed the safe threshold, especially dangerous if you're breathing it in overnight." She stared at the unassuming air vent. For weeks it had sat there colorless, odorless, giving off no sign but had been steadily pumping toxic gas into her lungs and Max's as they slept. "How long does it take it to do damage?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "If the concentration is high, just a few hours could be fatal. But if it's low and leaks continuously like this..." Jake looked her in the eye. "It can slowly kill someone, over weeks, and almost no one notices." Emma felt dizzy. She took a step back and leaned against the wall. This apartment, once a symbol of her independence, of her fresh start, was nothing more than a glass box filled with invisible death. I didn't smell anything. There was no smoke, no warning. "That's the danger of CO," Jake said. "It's odorless, colorless. It fills your space, makes you think you're just tired, stressed, sleep-deprived. By the time people realize what's wrong, it's often too late." Emma was silent. Her mind replayed all the nights of restless sleep, the mornings she dragged herself out of bed without knowing why Max whimpering and tugging at the blanket, the warning in his eyes she had failed to understand. Jake looked up, his expression firm. "I'll call in a maintenance team to inspect the central heating system and seal the leak. But until then, you can't sleep here, not even one more night." Emma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll leave now. I just need to grab a few things." Before walking out, she took one last look around the apartment. She saw the bed once, her place of comfort, now a symbol of threat. She saw Max in her memory, lying weakly by her side, fighting for every breath just to alert her. She saw herself slowly withering away in the very home she had been so proud to call her own. Jake stepped up beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing. You called me. You listened to your dog. Not everyone's that lucky, Emma." Emma tried to smile, but the tears came too fast. She wiped them away, grabbed her bag, nodded to Jake, and stepped outside. The sharp afternoon wind hit her face, but for the first time in weeks, she could breathe. That night, Emma stayed at Sarah's again. Max lay peacefully at the foot of the bed, breathing softly, not labored, not gasping. She didn't need sleeping pills. She didn't pass out from exhaustion. She closed her eyes and finally felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Peace. Emma didn't return to her apartment right after the carbon monoxide was discovered. She followed Jake's advice, letting the space air out thoroughly while waiting for the repair team to fully inspect the heating system. For the next 2 days, Emma and Max stayed at Sarah's, a warm, familiar place, and most importantly, safe. She slept a lot, but not the kind of sleep soaked in fatigue and vague darkness. For the first time in weeks, Emma woke up without the spinning in her head or the heaviness weighing down her body. She looked out the window and saw the soft morning sunlight stretching across the balcony. Max was curled up in that light, breathing steadily, his body rising and falling with each relaxed breath. Max had changed too. No more whimpering, no more dull, pleading eyes. Now he moved gracefully, wagged his tail when she called, and even playfully nudged his favorite toy ball, something he hadn't touched in weeks. Watching Max bounce around the backyard at Sarah's place, Emma could only sit quietly, clutching a warm cup of tea, her eyes beginning to blur with tears. She had almost lost him, and she had almost lost herself. On the third day, Jake called to let her know the entire heating system in her apartment had been checked and fixed. One joint in the pipes had been loose, a tiny flaw, but in a sealed apartment during winter, it became a silent weapon, taking lives hour by hour. "We replaced the whole pipe section, sealed the leak, and installed a permanent CO detector," Jake said over the phone. "You can go back now, but I'd still recommend letting it air out for another 24 hours. Emma thanked him, then hung up. She looked at Max, lying contentedly in the sunlight. "We can go home now," she whispered. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, then relaxed again as if to say, "As long as you're there, any place is home." When she returned to the apartment, Emma walked in with an entirely different feeling. No fear. No doubt, everything looked the same, the familiar couch, the reading lamp, the window overlooking the street. But the air was fresh now, light as if the apartment itself had been saved alongside her. She threw open all the windows, letting sunlight and wind flood in. She cleaned the kitchen again, changed all the bed sheets, and placed Max on a freshly washed rug. She installed an extra CO detector in the bedroom, another in the kitchen. This time, she wasn't letting a single warning go unnoticed. That night, Emma didn't turn on the TV. She turned off the lights, crawled under the blanket, and pulled it up to her chest. Max, by now out of habit, jumped onto the bed and curled up at her feet, his eyes slowly closing as if he knew he was finally safe. In the peaceful darkness, Emma whispered, "Thank you for pulling the blanket that night." Max didn't answer, but his calm, strong breathing was the best reply. The following days passed with a slow, gentle rhythm. Emma gradually regained her strength. Her skin began to regain its color. Her eyes looked less vacant. She ate again, slept better, and no longer saw a ghost in the mirror. She returned to work. Her boss, upon seeing her, simply exclaimed, "Well, look who finally came back." Emma only smiled. She didn't explain that just a week ago she could barely get out of bed, that if it weren't for a loyal dog, a brave friend, and one timely decision, she might have ended up as nothing more than a cold statistic in the morning news. Max recovered remarkably too. Every morning as she walked him around the block, Max skipped like a child. He barked playfully at other dogs, rolled on the grass, and chased dried leaves tumbling in the breeze. Emma watched him holding the leash tightly, eyes misting over with joy. He was back, not just in body, but in spirit. Every wag of his tail, every playful lunge was proof of a second chance at life. One afternoon, while sitting by the window, Emma opened her laptop and began to write. Not a report, not a work task, but her story. She wrote about the apartment, the vague signs, the persistent fatigue, and how Max had tried to save her in every way a dog knew how. With his eyes, his whimpers, his desperate tug on the blanket. She posted the story online, not expecting anything, but within hours it went viral. Hundreds of shares and comments flooded in. People told their own stories of similar symptoms they never questioned. Someone wrote, "Thanks to your story, I checked my home and found issues in my heating system." Yipan, another, said, "You and Max are heroes to yourselves." Emma read every comment, her heart pounding. Finally, she understood survival wasn't just luck. It was an opportunity to warn others, to protect lives, to turn pain into something that could save someone else. That night, when Max jumped onto the bed again, Emma didn't push him off like she used to. She smiled, patted the pillow beside her, and said, "Sleep here, you've earned it more than anyone." Max burrowed into the blanket, breathing softly after a full belly, and fell asleep. Outside, the city fell into night, but in that small room the light still glowed, not from a lamp, but from something warmer. Life had returned. That morning when Emma opened her phone, her inbox was overflowing with messages. Strangers from across the country had left words of gratitude. Some called her the lucky storyteller or the woman saved by her dog. But Emma didn't care about titles. What moved her most was the awakening her story had stirred in others. "Ma'am, I've been tired and sluggish for months and never knew why. Yesterday I read your post and bought a CO detector. Turns out my home does have a leak. My mother lives alone and never thought about gas leaks. After reading your story, she installed a CO alarm. A dog saved a human. I don't know what else to say other than thank you for writing about it." Those words, simple, honest, unembellished, made Emma's throat tighten. She had never imagined that such a personal, painful story would spread this far. But now, with everything behind her, she understood sharing wasn't about recognition, it was about warning, so that someone somewhere could recognize the signs she had once ignored. She decided to do more. Emma drafted an email to the building management proposing mandatory CO detectors in every unit. She attached Jake's full technical report images and even a brief journal entry detailing both her and Max's health decline. At first, the response was indifferent, but after her story went viral on social media, management reached out again, confirming they would inspect the entire heating system by the end of the month. Emma didn't stop there. She wrote a follow-up post, this time longer, more detailed. She described the symptoms, the feelings, the tiny signs people usually brushed off. Restless sleep, unexplained fatigue, persistent headaches, pets acting lethargic, losing interest in food. She recalled precisely the moment Max tugged at the blanket, the night she woke with a feeling that something was off, but couldn't explain why. She ended the post with one short line: "Don't wait until you can't wake up to realize your home is poisoning you." A few days later, she received a call from a local news reporter. They were producing a segment on home safety and invited Emma to appear as someone with real experience. At first, she hesitated. Emma didn't like being in front of a camera, and she wasn't used to telling her story publicly. But then she looked at Max resting his head on her leg and remembered how much she almost lost because she hadn't seen the signs. Emma nodded. "I'll do it." The filming took place in her apartment, now fully equipped with CO safety measures. The camera slowly panned across the room, showing the wall where the first photo of Emma and Max taken on the day she brought him home from the shelter was hanging. Then it focused on the small white CO detector near the floor, its green light blinking steadily like a silent sentinel. Emma told everything from the first night Max climbed onto her bed to the morning she woke up drained, to the days Max refused food and the terrifying moment when she couldn't even open her eyes. Her voice didn't tremble or crack. It was slow and steady, as if every word was forged from lived experience. When the segment aired, thousands watched, shared, and continued spreading the story. An animal shelter in a neighboring state even began giving away small CO detectors to each new pet adopter with a message attached: "Because your pet might be the one who saves your life." That weekend, Emma returned to the Sunridge Animal Shelter. She didn't come to adopt another dog, but to give something back. In her hands was a small box of 15 handheld CO detectors she had purchased with her own money. She handed it to the shelter manager, a kind-faced older woman. "Please give one of these to every person adopting a pet," Emma said, "and tell them Max's story." The woman looked at her for a long moment, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than survive, dear. You turned a tragedy into something that could help so many." Emma smiled in eyes misty. "It wasn't me, it was Max." That evening when they returned home, Emma opened the door and knelt to unclip Max's leash. He trotted straight to the living room, hopped onto the couch and looked back at her as if waiting. Emma stepped in, shut the door behind her and sat beside him. Outside city lights twinkled like scattered stars. Inside, the soft yellow glow of a lamp filled the room. Not the suffocating silence it once held, but now a peace that felt earned. Emma gently stroked Max's back and whispered, "You saved me. Now it's my turn to do something good for others." Max stretched, let out a satisfied sigh and settled in. And for Emma, that was all the confirmation she needed. She had been right not to stay silent. Their story was no longer a tragedy. It had become a warning, and a lesson, and a quiet miracle that the world needed to hear. A week after the interview aired, Emma's life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, but a normal redefined. There were no more mornings waking up with a dense fog of fatigue in her head, no more lifeless stares in the bathroom mirror, and no more silent, lingering loneliness that stretched into the night in her quiet apartment. Now, each morning, Emma awoke to sunlight pouring through her window, fresh air filling the room, and Max lying at the foot of her bed, tail wagging. The moment she opened her eyes, he was no longer weak, no longer panting helplessly. Instead, Max was back to being himself, alert, joyful, and always beside her. Like an unwavering friend who never asked for anything in return, Emma began to slow down. She cut back on overtime, declined unnecessary meetings, and instead she wrote, not for a deadline, but to remember to preserve and to give thanks. In a brown leather notebook on her desk, the first sentence she penned was, "I was saved by a dog." And below that, she continued not as a victim, but as a survivor. Someone who had awakened to the understanding that life is a gift, never to be taken for granted. One weekend afternoon, Emma took Max to the park near their home. The sky was a clear, washed-out blue, and a soft breeze rustled through the trees, making the leaves whisper like quiet voices. Max ran across the grass, ears flapping in the wind. mouth open, tongue lolling, a smile from a creature who knew what it meant to be alive. Emma sat down on a wooden bench, eyes following Max as he chased a drifting yellow leaf. She wondered if he truly understood everything that had happened. Perhaps he didn't know what carbon monoxide was, or understand the danger or the biochemical symptoms that had once plagued her. But Max felt it. He had sensed the change in her breath, the shift in the air, the things that humans often miss with logic and reason. He had tugged the blanket, whined softly, licked her face when she couldn't open her eyes. He hadn't given up, even when he was fading too. Emma raised her hand to her mouth, holding back the wave of emotion rising in her chest. She thought of all the times in her life she had ignored the subtle signs, the days she let feelings sink into silence. And then somehow a creature without words had pulled her out of that darkness. The miracle didn't come from medicine or science. It came from love, loyalty, and an unconditional connection. As the sun began to set, Emma stood and called Max. He turned and bounded toward her, full body weight, hitting her legs, making her stumble back. But she laughed anyway. They walked home slowly as if savoring every second of this peace. Back home, Emma brewed a pot of herbal tea, pouring it into 2 cups, one for her and a small bowl for Max, a new ritual they had started. She played soft jazz music. The saxophone filled the apartment with a gentle hum. Her heart softened, no longer anxious, no longer afraid. She sat on the rug back against the couch. Max rested his head in her lap. Emma placed a hand gently on his head, stroking the fur that had once been damp with sweat and tears from their darkest nights. "Thank you, Max," she whispered. "If it weren't for you, I might not be here right now." Max gave a soft groan, still resting his head on her leg, but she knew he understood, because between a person and a dog, no language is needed for a heartfelt thank you. Emma and Max's story didn't end with a triumphant song or a fairy tale finale. There were no fireworks, no trophies for Survivor of the Year, but it ended with something far more valuable: a promise. Emma promised herself never to overlook the little things again: the soft whines, the gentle licks, the gut feeling that something was off. She promised to live more slowly, more truthfully, and more gratefully. And she promised to always love Max, not just because he saved her, but because of the friendship he gave her unconditionally from the very first day they met. In a world full of chaos where people chase grand goals and forget the small signs, warning them each day, Emma and Max's story was a gentle yet powerful reminder. Sometimes what saves you isn't a doctor or a miracle drug. It's a quiet soul who loves you with their whole heart. That night, Emma pulled up the covers and turned off the light. Max was already on the bed, taking up his usual spot. She didn't complain, didn't ask him to move. She smiled, patted the blanket softly. "Good night, my little hero." And in that small room beneath the soft glow of a nightlight, with the steady breath of 2 lives once nearly lost, something more sacred than recovery took place. A quiet, steady rebirth of faith in life itself, gentle, silent, and enduring.